for questions and comments after routine proceedings today. Statements by members, déclaration de députés. The honourable member for Davenport.
Madam Speaker, a few weeks ago, I was honoured to join the Prime Minister along with the Ministers of Foreign Affairs, International Trade and Public Safety at the North American Leaders Summit in my role as chair of the Canada-Mexico Parliamentary Friendship Group. During the summit, the leaders signed the Declaration of North America, a joint leaders' statement focused on building our economy to benefit people and to expand trilateral cooperation. With over 500 million people and $24 trillion in combined GDP, representing one of the world's largest trading blocs, the trilateral partnership is an opportunity to show the world that our democracies can successfully work together to address the most pressing challenges of our time. Canada's partnership with the United States and Mexico advances Canadian priorities of building a clean economy, bolstering resilient supply chains, and building our economies to work for everyone. Our Prime Minister enforced the importance of our trade agreements being inclusive and benefiting all Canadians. It is only through inclusive and sustainable growth that we will continue to have the support of all Canadians and be an inspiration to the world. Thank you so much, Madam Speaker.
For Saskatoon West.
Madam Speaker, during January, I met with many folks from the west side of Saskatoon. One message became abundantly clear to me. After 8 years, they are sick and tired of the NDP Liberal coalition government breaking our community. Whether it's at the gas pumps, the grocery store, or walking down our main streets, people see every day how everything is broken. The NDP has been pushing for higher gasoline prices by raising the carbon tax on ordinary folks. They've been colluding with the Liberals to raise food prices. After 8 years, crime is on the rise as the NDP and Liberals work together to set criminals free. People in Saskatoon continue to deal with persistent repeat criminals because revolving door sentencing policies allow thugs to commit a crime, get released on bail, and victimize yet another person as they please. After 8 years, Canadians are ready for a change from this failing, broken NDP Liberal coalition. Thankfully, Conservatives under our new leader will meet the challenge. What they have broken, we will fix.
Good job.
The honourable member for Malpeque.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to honour a longtime staff person of the Malpeque team, Ken McDonald, who recently passed away on January 15th at the young age of 52 following a courageous battle of cancer. Kim first started with the Malpeque constituency office in 2011 with then MP Wayne Easter, and I've had the pleasure of having her on my team since joining federal politics in 2021. Throughout her time in the office, Kim was a caring and professional employee who helped many constituents over the years, whether that was looking into their case or simply being someone to listen to their concerns and hearing them out. Kim also was a very lively spirit in the office, with her quick wit and great sense of humor, keeping all of us on our toes and laughing even during challenging times. I know I speak for all my staff when I say we will miss you, Kim, and we appreciate everything you have done for myself, Wayne Easter, and the constituents of Malpeque. To her husband, Paul, and children, Austin, Malcolm, Liam, and Bella, we send our heartfelt condolences and thank you for sharing your wife and your mom with us. You are all in our thoughts and prayers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Abitibi, Bay James, Nunavik, EU. Mr. Speaker, a remarkable man from our riding was one of 49 people inducted into the Order of Canada on December 13th. Bill Namagoose, who has been Director General of the Government of the Cree Nation for 35 years, was inducted into the order for his major contributions to the Iu-Itchi Cree Nation and for his work to promote Indigenous rights across Canada. It was with an eye to reconciliation that Bill Namagoose accepted this honour. Mr. Namagoose was band manager of the Waskaganish Cree Nation from 1978 to 1988 and chief in 1983 to 1984. He contributed to building the relationship between the Cree Nation, Quebec, and Canada, and it's an accomplishment of which he's particularly proud. He also participated in negotiating the Pays des Braves and in the creation of the Iu-Itchi James Bay Regional Government. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to list all of his exploits and accomplishments, but Mr. Namagoose, I congratulate you for this richly deserved honour, and I wish you a happy retirement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Acadie Bathurst. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canadians from coast to coast to coast should hear the name of Mr. Arthur Léon Haché. Mr. Haché passed away December 7th at the age of 98. He was the last living Second World War veteran from Acadie Bathurst. He was only 17 when he enrolled with the North Shore Regiment. After participating in 2 major battles, the Normandy landings and the Battle of Escaut, he came back to Canada with tough memories, physical injuries, and psychological injuries as well. Despite all of that, Mr. HOC always attended commemorative activities, and he never hesitated to tell the stories that he and his fellow veterans lived through. He was a great inspiration for people in our community, and he will be remembered as a hero. I offer my sincere condolences to his wife, Dorina, and his children, Hector, Michel, and Carole. We must never forget that thanks to the sacrifices made by Mr. HOC, we can today live in freedom and peace in our country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
Mr. Speaker, today is Groundhog Day, and I'm proud to represent Canada's world-famous prognosticator, Wired and Willie. Before I share his prediction, I'll share how Groundhog Day began for most Canadians. Their alarms went off. They rolled over, grabbed their phones, and read about a Liberal sweetheart deal for McKinsey. The next day, their alarms went off. They rolled over, grabbed their phones, and were shocked to see yet another McKinsey contract for millions of dollars. They went to bed that night thinking, this nightmare has to end. But lo and behold, when they woke up the next morning, there was another $1 million contract for McKinsey. Shame. Mr. Speaker, you may think Bill Murray had it bad in the movie Groundhog Day, but after 8 years and a random Liberal and after another random Liberal getting rich, it's costing taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. The good news is Wired and Willie brought hope for Canadians this morning, Mr. Speaker. In the great riding of Bruce Grey, Owen Sound, he predicted an early spring, and he also predicted an end to the Liberal scandals and a Conservative win in the next federal election.
The honourable member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Iranian regime continues its ruthless crackdown on women's rights and other vulnerable populations, I want to call attention to the plight of Morad Tabaz. This past January marks more than 5 years since he and 5 other environmental activists were unjustly imprisoned by the Iranian government for allegations of espionage and sedition. Mr. Speaker, I cannot understand how the activities of Mr. Tabaz and his colleagues, such as monitoring the ecosystems and social habitats of endangered species such as the Asiatic cheetah, can possibly be considered credible grounds for imprisonment. I applaud the Iranian people for continuing to stand up for women's rights and human rights, to shine a light on the plight of those Iranians brave enough to fight for their country and their planet.
I note the exceptional courage of the Iranian people defending their rights and their homes, as well as their fight against injustice.
Alongside my fellow York Region Liberal Caucus MPs, I endorse #Morad Tabaz. Commit to fighting for his release, sharing his story, and letting the Iranian regime know that we are watching. We will not rest until he is free. We, as York Region Liberal members of the Canadian Parliament, demand the immediate and unconditional release of #Morad Tabaz. All the political prisoners who participated in the Women Life Freedom movement in Iran, in particular those who are facing imminent threat of sentencing and execution.
The honourable member for Cloverdale, Langley City.
Speaker, last month I had the opportunity to connect with many constituents about their experiences with the Canada Child Benefit, or CCB, and the new child care agreement in BC. One woman told me her heartbreaking story of being in an abusive relationship. Because of the CCB, she was able to leave and restart the lives of herself and her children. Others expressed to me how the CCB, tied to inflation, has kept their finances stable in this time of global inflation, allowing them to feed and clothe their children. Regarding childcare, I met a single mother who was able to go back to work because a childcare space became available. Her fees were reduced by 50%, thanks in large part to our agreement with BC. Another family is also saving money on their fees. This has allowed them to afford childcare for their 3 kids, allowing both parents to return to work. These are just a few stories I heard about how our government's support for families is making a difference. I look forward to 2026 when $10 a day childcare is fully implemented in BC. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Niagara Falls.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Liberal government, Canadians are suffering greatly. The proof is everywhere you look. Crime is skyrocketing, our bail system is broken, and there are Liberal scandals aplenty. On matters of the economy, hardworking Canadians are being squeezed by this government's actions or lack thereof. On the end, Canadians are being pressured by inflation, which is being driven by out-of-control Liberal spending and a big dysfunctional government. Today, after 8 years of this Liberal government, Canadians are taking home less of their hard-earned money, but they are paying more. Rent and mortgage interest rates are up. Gas and home heating bills are up. Grocery costs are up. Inflation and taxes are up. And Canadians are fed up. Mr. Speaker, hardworking and law-abiding Canadians need to know this. Conservatives are here for them, and they can count on us to work for them so they can live more affordably, bring home bigger paychecks, and take back control of their everyday lives.
The honourable member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
Mr. Speaker, we know residential schools caused unspeakable harm to Indigenous peoples, language, and cultures. Acceptance and compensation of the harms was a critical catalyst in the process of reconciliation. And it took visionary and dedicated leadership to fight for the same justice for the survivors and descendants of those victimized by day schools. The systematic destruction of Indigenous identity that took place at these institutions did not just impact individuals, it impacted the nations as a whole. After over a decade of legal proceedings, a groundbreaking settlement was reached on January 21st to compensate the bands for the collective harm. A new trust was created to support healing, wellness, education, heritage, and language to help repair the damage that was done. I want to honor the many that fought for this, including Hewis Gary Feschuk of the Sechelt Nation, without whom justice would be denied. Olnom Shalat, Mr. Speaker.
For King Von.
Buongiorno, Signora Presidente. The Liberals have had 8 years to make our streets safer, and they have made things worse. The Liberals and their soft-on-crime policies most recently allowed a man previously arrested for assault to re-offend and assault an innocent senior. An 89-year-old elderly woman was attacked, unprovoked, in January while simply walking along the sidewalks in Toronto in broad daylight. Sadly, this senior died. Violent crime is on the rise in Canadian cities. It has increased by 32% since the Liberal government took power, and violent crime has increased 92% during the 8 years of this Liberal government. Canadians are terrified. The streets they used to use, they're afraid to use public transit. They're afraid to walk the streets. When is this Liberal government going to take more care about the victims and the criminals?
The honourable member for Calgary Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister promised sunny ways. What do we have after 8 years? Doubling Canada's federal debt, the highest inflation rate in a generation, energy costs going through the roof, and a government unable to deliver basic services to Canadians. Sunny ways, you say. Well, the sun is shining on the lucky ones at McKinsey, being paid millions as Liberal consultants and on friends of cabinet ministers. After 8 years, the people working hard to join the middle class are discovering they are second class, while this government is taking care of their friends. Liberals can't or won't deliver our environmentally renowned energy security options to our desperate allies. Foreign leaders come to Canada asking for our help, and the Prime Minister gives them the cold shoulder. Freeze in the dark or deal with autocrats, he says. After 8 years, Canada's international reputation is in tatters. There is a path forward, Mr. Speaker. The Conservative Party will mend divisions, rebuild our country, our economy, and our reputation as a world leader.
The honourable member for Nickel Belt.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to congratulate the volunteers of the Centre Club d'Âge d'Or de la Vallée on the occasion of their 50th anniversary. I'd also like to thank all their current members and the founders in 1973. I'd like to thank all members of the FARFO of Nickelbelk, the Federation of Francophone Seniors and Retirees of Ontario, which has a major impact on improving the quality of life of our seniors. It's essential that we continue to support organizations like Club 50 in Rayside Balfour, L'Accueil d'Âge d'Or in Azilda, the Club d'Amitié in Verner, the Club d'Âge d'Or in River Valley, Field, Lavigne, and Sturgeon Falls, and the Seniors of Rivière-des-Français de Noëlville. For decades, these organizations have helped ensure that seniors are active and engaged in their community through social activities, breakfasts, and community events. I'm proud to live in a community where organizations like yours work hard to improve quality of life for our seniors. Thank you. Miigwech.
I just want to remind everyone that the SO31s are taking place. I know there's people talking amongst themselves, but it just seems to be creeping up. I just want to remind everyone. The honourable member for Algoma, Manitoulin, Kapuskasing.
Mr. Speaker, we all have a shared commitment to public safety, but when it comes to Indigenous policing, services are chronically underfunded. Indigenous police forces such as those within my riding, the UCCM Anishinaabe Police, Wikwemikong Police Service, Anishinaabeg Police Service, and the Anishinaabe ASCII Police Service do great work in serving First Nations communities. However, there is an urgent need to ensure that negotiations to renew agreements include a healthy increase to core funding.
Often, only 2 officers are on duty per shift, and when officers respond to a call in one community, it regularly leaves them unable to respond to calls from other First Nations communities.
Lately, there has been an increase in homicide, gun, drug, and human trafficking-related crimes. First Nations police services need more funding to hire more officers and dedicated funding for crime units to better respond to public safety issues so that no community is left unprotected. Today, I ask all parliamentarians to call for increases to core funding and the renewal of First Nations policing agreements. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Mr. Speaker, let's play a guessing game. I'll describe an event that attracts tens of thousands of tourists every year. It takes place in Quebec City. It's the biggest winter festival in the world, and it has a friendly and iconic mascot who's recognized and loved by old and young alike. I'm sure you've guessed, of course, it's Quebec City's Carnaval. And this year, Quebecers are excited to welcome everyone to Quebec City from February 3rd to 12th. And don't forget your toques. Carnival is made possible by the implication and dedication of its organizers and volunteers, and they can't wait to welcome you, whether that be at Bonham's Campground, at the canoe races, the Sculpture's Snow Route, or at the famous Snowball. And this year, well, we've got lots of snow, so come and celebrate winter and warm your heart at the 69th Annual Carnaval in Quebec City. And don't forget your effigy, your trumpet, and your Saint-Jean Fléché. I'm ready to party, and I hope that you are too. Look forward to seeing you at Carnaval.
Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, there is no sadder story than that of unrequited love. When one person showers the other with gifts and favors, while the other claims to be totally disinterested. I'm talking, of course, about the relationship between the Prime Minister and Dominic Barton. When the Prime Minister spoke about how accessible Barton is, Barton claimed to not even have his phone number. When the Prime Minister gave Barton's company over $100 million in contracts, Barton didn't even recognize him in an elevator. I used to say that this was a government that helped its friends, but maybe it's just a government that helps the people it wishes were its friends. Then again, Dominic Barton is just naturally forgetful. His company worked for Purdue Pharma for 15 years, advising them on how to turbocharge opioid sales, yet Barton claims he didn't even know they were a client. But either way, after all that this Prime Minister has done for McKinsey, Barton's rejection must really sting. But it's nothing like the Canadians who are living with this Prime Minister's economic policies have been experiencing for the last 8 years.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member for Northwest Territories.
Across Canada, we're feeling the effects of a lack of healthcare workers. In the NMBT, we've been experiencing this for some time, but recently on a much higher level. This year, in 10 communities, including my own, the health centers were only able to offer emergency services. In our territorial hospital, for a brief time this summer, they were only able to offer emergency operating services. And for 3 months, they had to close the maternity ward, flying expectant mothers to Alberta. Our vacancy rate for some health authorities have been as high as 50%. The pool of healthcare workers in Canada is just not big enough. We need to train, educate, incentivize more doctors, more nurses, more lab specialists. This has to become a national priority. Poaching from other jurisdictions and other countries is not the way forward. Expanding the pool is. Thank you to all the dedicated people working in the northern and remote areas providing these services. We see and appreciate you all. Thank you very much.
Hey, well done, well done.
Oral questions. Question orale. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
8 ans.
After 8 years of inflationist policies from this government, the cost of the average mortgage monthly has increased by about $1,500 to north of $3,000. That's a doubling. There's a nearly equal increase when it comes to rent. Inflationist policies have increased the price of everything and increased interest rates. Will the Prime Minister finally take his responsibilities and accept that it is because of him that houses cost twice as much with their mortgage? Yes, for 8 years, Canadians have put their trust in us. We have represented them as a government after 3 elections. And why? Because Canadians know that we are here for them. We were here for them during the pandemic. We were here and are here to bring children out of poverty through the childcare benefit. We are here to help families send their kids to the dentist. Canadians trust us because they know that we are here for them.
After 8 years of this Prime Minister's inflationary policies driving up home prices and now interest rates, the cost of a monthly mortgage, on average, has gone up from about $1,500 to over $3,000. No wonder 9 in 10 young people who don't own a home believe they never will. Home price inflation is a homegrown problem. Instead of blaming the rest of the world for the problems he's caused, will the Prime Minister take responsibility for pricing our working-class youth out of a home?
The Honourable Minister for Housing.
I'm very aware of the importance of keeping Canadian home ownership alive. That's why we introduced measures such as investing in a scale-up rent-to-own program in Canada, the creation of a tax-free savings account of up to $40,000 for first-time home buyers, and a 2-year ban on foreign ownership of Canadian residential real estate to give more opportunities to young people. But what do all these measures share in common? The Leader of the official opposition voted against them.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
We voted against every single one of the inflationary programs that have doubled the cost of housing in this country for our young people. After 8 years, all they can do is brag about the hundreds of billions of dollars of other people's money they spent. What is the result? Home prices doubled to make Canada the 5th most inflated housing market in the world, with Toronto having the worst city as housing markets go. The average mortgage payment has doubled from $1,500 to $3,300, and rent in Toronto, our biggest city, is up nearly 100%. Will they finally take responsibility for pricing our young people out of a home?
The Honourable Minister for Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, it's not a hedge against inflation that the Conservatives voted against supporting Canadians. It's their ideology that drives them. Take a look at the facts, Mr. Speaker. Canada's inflation is lower than the US, Germany, the UK, the averages of the G7, the OECD, and the EU. Mr. Speaker, they voted against Canadians. Mothers who took CERB did not create inflation. Businesses that kept their businesses afloat during the pandemic did not create inflation. And parents that are taking their kids to the dentist for the first time didn't create inflation. They're peddling nonsense economics. We're delivering for Canadians.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
No, none of those Canadians created inflation. This Prime Minister created it. Doubled our national debt, adding $500 billion of inflationary debt, adding more debt than all other prime ministers combined. What did that do? That inflated the price of everything, especially real estate. Delivered the single worst housing bubble anywhere in the world right in Toronto. Toronto is more overpriced than Singapore, than Manhattan, than London, England. Now, the cost of a mortgage has doubled across the country, and the cost of rent has doubled in our biggest markets as well. This is a homegrown problem. Will they finally take responsibility for causing it?
The Honourable Minister for Housing.
Mr. Speaker, will the Leader of the official opposition take responsibility for voting against the Housing Accelerator Fund, a program to build more supply and make sure that we speed up processes to make sure we build more homes for Canadians? Will the Leader of the Opposition take responsibility for voting against the first-time tax-free savings account of up to $40,000 to enable first-time home buyers to buy a home? Will the Leader of the official opposition take responsibility for voting against the foreign ban on Canadian residential real estate? Whether it is on supply, whether it is on supports for rental, supports for Canadians, he votes against all of that, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
After 8 years of growing poverty and desperation, more and more Canadians are suffering with depression. Some of them are going to food banks asking for help ending their lives, not because they're sick, but because life has become so miserable and they want to end their lives altogether. This government has suggested veterans should end their lives instead of getting help that they need. And now they've announced that a year from today, they will introduce measures to end the lives of people who are depressed. Will they recognize that we need to treat depression and give people hope for a better life rather than ending their lives?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health.
Mr. Speaker, I think it is totally irresponsible for the Leader of the Opposition to misrepresent what this means. All of the assessors and providers for MAID are purposely trained to eliminate people that are suicidal. And so this is for...
Order! The Honourable Minister, please proceed. You have 10 seconds left.
On this side, and with the support of the expert panel and so many Canadians, we'll continue to develop and provide the kind of mental health supports that are necessary for people who are depressed. But the people...
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. The Honourable Member for La Prairie has the floor. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Leader of the Bloc Québécois met with the federal government's Special Representative on Islamophobia, Ms. Amira El-Gawabi. Ms. El-Gawabi, who has the 100% support of the Prime Minister, has made headlines since her appointment for numerous statements against Quebecers. Even the Quebec Liberal lieutenant felt insulted. The National Assembly of Quebec has asked for her resignation. She cannot stay. Will the Prime Minister rectify the situation finally and demand her departure? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, our government's position is clear. We know that Quebecers are against all forms of racism. The Special Representative has already clarified her position and apologised for the impact of her past comments on Quebecers. I would like to invite the member to read these statements. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Not only is Ms. El-Gawabi not the right person for the job, but the job itself is a problem. Wrong person for a wrong position. We all understand that the purpose of this position is to make us believe that Bill 21 is evil, that Quebec is racist, and that secularism is Islamophobic. This is simply not true, and rather than building bridges, this kind of position creates barriers between communities. Will the Prime Minister back down and abolish the position of Special Representative to combat Islamophobia? The Honourable Minister for Housing.
I was with the Prime Minister on Sunday in Quebec City, and we saw that Quebecers from all walks of life stood shoulder to shoulder with Muslim Canadians on the somber occasion of the 6th anniversary of the Quebec City mosque shooting. The appointment of the Special Representative to combat Islamophobia is a recognition and is building on the foundation of leadership of Quebecers and Canadians to fight racism and discrimination in all its forms. The Special Representative has clarified and apologized for the impact of her remarks, and she has shown very clearly a willingness to work with all Canadians to combat Islamophobia. Merci beaucoup.
I would like to remind members
that we're in the middle of question period, and I'm hearing conversations happen. It's nice that everybody's getting along and talking. But if you've got a conversation to have, if you don't mind, maybe just going into the hallway and then coming back once you've had your discussion.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals have handed over $100 million to McKinsey, and that is just the tip of the iceberg. That's not counting the millions to Deloitte, KPMG and others. Not only is this a waste of public funds, it also undermines our very own public service. It is a form of privatization. Meanwhile, the Liberals are playing cheapskates at the bargaining table. Members of our public service deserve respect. Why do the Liberals have millions, apparently, for their friends in the boardroom and nothing for our public service employees? The Honourable President of the Treasury Board. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Listen, the Prime Minister has given me the mandate, as well as the Minister for Appropriations, to study the matter, and that is what we will do. We continue to follow the most stringent openness and transparency parameters, and we will continue to support Canadians in order to make sure that there are good jobs, good services, and that is how we will continue to support Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Courtney Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve accountability and transparency from this government. They deserve answers on Conservatives and Liberals' long-standing partnership with expensive consulting firms when Canada has one of the best public services. McKinsey is just the tip of the iceberg. That's why New Democrats are calling to investigate firms that have been raking in hundreds of millions of dollars from the government, like Deloitte and PricewaterhouseCoopers. Will the Liberals and Conservatives both agree to stop giving piles of public money to their friends at consulting firms and support a full investigation into government outsourcing?
The Honourable Member for the Public Service.
Mr. Speaker, and as I've said repeatedly in this House, we are committed to ensuring that our government contracts stand up to the highest standards. I will be testifying on Monday at the Government Operations Committee along with my officials, and I look forward to answering the opposition's questions more fulsomely at that time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, after this Prime Minister and this government, Canadians are suffering. Mortgage payments have doubled. Rents have increased right across the country in the highest pace in the last 30 years. The cost of groceries have skyrocketed. Everything is more expensive because of this government's inflationary spending and uncontrolled spending, Mr. Speaker. Will they now admit that their economic policies over the last 8 years have not worked and it's time to change course to help Canadians get through the mess that they created?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I had an opportunity during the course of the other questions to reflect upon the question that was posed by the Leader of the Opposition. I would suggest that the Leader think about the assertion that anybody supports anybody taking their life. That when there are difficult times, and when we are talking about issues like MAID, Mr. Speaker, it is below this place to assume that any person anywhere in this country supports the idea of suicide as a way through dark times.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, it's the disastrous economic policy of this government for the last 8 years has left people in complete despair. It has actually caused the 40-year high inflation that we see now and forced the Bank of Canada to raise interest rates again. Over 70% of Canadians say that they may not be able to keep up with these rate increases. So now, will this government realize that their economic policies of the last 8 years have been wrong? They're not working. It's time to change course and help Canadians get through the mess that they created.
The Honourable Minister for Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians know how to get through tough times. We pull together, we support each other, we don't leave people alone. The Conservative ideology is, Canadians, you're on your own. Businesses, let the markets decide. Seniors, don't worry. Go into your savings, pay for your own rent and your own groceries. The Conservatives, Mr. Speaker, have no plan on climate change, on building the economy, on affordability. They have buzzwords and catchphrases and nonsense economics. They have no plan. We do.
The Honourable Member for Peterborough Kawartha.
After 8 years of this Liberal Prime Minister, people are truly struggling, and everyone knows it except these Liberals. The common question on talk shows is, what are you cutting back on due to inflation? And the answers are heartbreaking. But what's even more disturbing is that these Liberals want to blame the global market for their inability to manage your money. Yet Tiff Macklem said in just October, inflation in Canada increasingly reflects what is happening in Canada. So when will the Liberals take accountability, responsibility, and fix what they've broken?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's all fine and good to cherry-pick the comments of the Bank of Governor, but let's actually look at the last statement from the Governor of the Bank, who clearly said that he will pause rate increases.
Are we ready now? The Honourable Minister, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Bank of Canada has been clear. We expect to see inflation around 3% by the summer and closer to 2% by the end of the year. That is their mission, to get inflation under control. Our job, which the Conservatives don't seem to understand because they keep voting against Canadians, is to provide supports to those who need it the most, and that's exactly what we're going to keep doing.
The Honourable Member for Peterborough-Kawartha.
Again, we see this over and over again. They love to listen to themselves instead of real Canadians. They love to tell Canadians they've never had it so good. Yet students are living in homeless shelters because rent in Toronto for a month is $2,500. Why? Because of this Liberal Prime Minister, 100% increase under his office. People are asking for medical assistance in dying because they can't afford to live. When will this Prime Minister fix what he has broken? And if he can't, get out of the way and let the Conservatives do the job.
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Mr. Speaker, what the members opposite are doing is absolutely shameful.
That's right.
To make a mockery of people suffering instead of supporting them when we're putting important measures on the table. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, there's one thing that Canadians have learned, and it's when they're in trouble, when they need help, they can't count on the Conservatives. The Conservatives are not there for them. If they cared about low-income renters, they would have supported us on our support for renters. If they cared about low-income Canadians, they would have supported us when we lowered taxes on the middle class, and they would have supported us when we increased the Canada Child Benefit, but they did none of that, Mr. Speaker. Canadians cannot count on...
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of Liberal governments, how is Canada doing? Inflation is the highest in 40 years. Rents have doubled. Mortgages have doubled. In Quebec, there are people who were working 8 years ago in food banks. Now they go to food banks themselves. That is the daily reality of Quebecers after 8 years of Liberal governments. When will the government start managing properly? The Honourable Minister for Sports. Mr. Speaker, we believe that to help Canadians, we have to invest in Canadians to help them weather the storm, as we did during the pandemic and as we're doing now with the increase in inflation. That is the reason for which we're helping students, for example, by eliminating interest on their loans. That's why we have also introduced a new Canadian benefit for workers. We've created a dental plan for under 12s. Why? Because we believe that when we invest in Canadians, the ROI is for everyone, and that's how Canada can be stronger. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Well, that's the problem, Mr. Speaker. After 8 years, Canada isn't stronger. Canada is weaker. And this despite the fact that this current government has raised debt by $500 billion. No control in spending for the past 8 years. Taxes have gone up. Everything is more expensive. That is the reality in Canada today. And that's what Canadians are confronting now. So when will the government finally take its responsibilities and manage public finances properly? The Honourable Minister for Heritage. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives are saying that we have helped Canadians too much, but I would like to know when we should have cut. Have we cut wage benefits? Should we have cut in our help to seniors? Should we perhaps have cut when we were helping families, helping those who lost their job during the pandemic? So my question is, when would they have chosen when to cut? When would they have decided to abandon Canadians? The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Mr. Speaker, Ottawa would like to welcome a minimum of 500,000 immigrants per year until the population reaches 100 million people. These thresholds are modelled on the Century Initiative, a proposal by McKinsey, and its former director, Dominic Barton. Yesterday at committee, I asked Mr. Barton if he had analysed the impact of this increase in immigration on the future of French. He replied, and I quote, that the focus was only on the economy, not on the social outfall. Did the government copy and paste an immigration policy from McKinsey that completely ignores the future of French in Canada and in Quebec? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, perhaps I would like to talk today. It's the first time that I will be answering a question with regards to Francophone immigration and the importance that Quebec and Canada has on the matter. I would like to highlight this in this House because I don't know if I'll have another opportunity. For the first time, I'd like to say, for the first time in our history, we have reached the 4.4% target in Francophone immigration outside of Quebec in Canada. And, Mr. Speaker, inaudible for the interpreter, there is too much surrounding sound. The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Mr. Speaker, Dominic Barton himself confirmed yesterday that the Century Initiative does not take into account the capacity for integration in French in Quebec and Francophone Canada. He states that the only focus was on productivity. So, if McKinsey did not take into account the impact of increased immigration on French, did the government do so before implementing its recommendations? Will the minister commit to disclosing all the studies on which they base their decision that we could welcome a minimum of 500,000 immigrants each year without impacting Francisation and French in Quebec and in Canada? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, listen. Francophone immigration has a key role to play in promoting French throughout Canada and in Quebec. Quebec, I would like to remind my colleagues, determines its own selection criteria for the vast majority of immigrants in that province, including with regards to what language they speak. We will always respect, Mr. Speaker, provincial jurisdictions, Quebec jurisdictions, and will continue to work with the province of Quebec. The Honourable Member for Mirabel. Mr. Speaker, so we know that McKinsey, by Dominic Barton's admission, did not take into account the impact on French before proposing a major increase in immigration. If the studies requested by the Bloc Québécois are not presented, we can assume that the federal government did not take into account either the impact on French before implementing McKinsey's recommendation. This, therefore, raises other questions. Can the government prove that it considered the impact on housing, health, or education needs, or has it decided simply to blindly trust McKinsey? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, listen. Like the MP across the way knows full well, the agreement between Canada and Quebec gives the province of Quebec exclusive powers in choosing the majority of its immigrants. And we have always respected and we will always respect Quebec's jurisdictions when it comes to immigration. And I know that our government is working hand in hand with Quebec in order to strengthen the system. Once again, I'll repeat it. We have reached our targets, Mr. Speaker, 4.4% of Francophone immigration outside of Quebec.
The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
While Canadians have been suffering for 8 years under this government, well-connected insiders have never had it so good. Dominic Barton confirmed yesterday that McKinsey's Canadian lead, Andrew Pickersgill, was coordinating support from McKinsey to the Prime Minister's Growth Council. In other words, his analysts were telling the government what they needed while they were selling McKinsey as a solution at the same time. If that's not a conflict of interest, I don't know what is. So will this government end the obvious conflict of interest and finally tell this House how much money was spent on McKinsey?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism.
The minister responsible has already answered that question, but let us set the record straight in terms of who is actually standing on the side of Canadians. That is our government. What has the Conservatives done? They voted not once, not twice, but 3 times against tax cuts for Canadians. That side of the aisle voted against eliminating interest on apprentice and student loans. They voted against a federal minimum wage, and they voted against expanding the Canada Workers' Benefit. Who stands on the side of Canadians? We do. Canadians know one thing, Mr. Speaker, when the chips are down, Canadians cannot count on Conservatives.
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We do know this government stands on the side of those Canadians who work for McKinsey, but on this side of the House, we speak for the vast majority of Canadians who are concerned about $100 million in contracts, and public service doesn't know what work was done. Now, Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, more Canadians than ever are suffering because of the opioid crisis, but the government continues to defend their friends. McKinsey's Managing Director Dominic Barton claimed to have no knowledge of the relationship with Purdue Pharma. Once again, did the Prime Minister or government ministers have any conversations with McKinsey staff about the opioid crisis? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister for the Honourable Minister for Families.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, what Canadians absolutely know is that the Conservative plan when it comes to opioids is dangerous, it is reckless, and it will put people in harm's way. And what they do know as well is that when it comes to standing with Canadians, we have stood with them, whether it was when we came into office and put in important measures to lift people out of poverty, whether it was during the pandemic when we were there in their darkest hour, and now when it comes to inflation, we put forward targeted measures that are helping Canadians every day. They know that we stand with them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Charbol-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, every government has used private sector legal or technical advice from time to time. But here we have a Liberal government that has completely lost control of its own government over the last 8 years. The Prime Minister has abandoned his governance responsibilities to multinationals like McKinsey. Instead of wasting billions of dollars on these companies, the Prime Minister could have invested here at home in made-in-Canada solutions. Why did the Prime Minister throw the Canadian Public Service under the bus? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have an exceptional public service and we trust our civil servants with whom we work day in, day out. We are investing in Canadians to make sure that our economy continues to grow and to make sure that programs are appropriate to help Canadians as much as possible. That, Mr. Speaker, all these programs are administered by our wonderful public servants. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cowichan-Malahat-Langford.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are making tough choices about what they can and can't afford because grocery prices are so unbelievably high. And today, Loblaws decided to stop the price freeze they put in place under considerable public pressure. This proves that grocery CEOs can control what people pay. The government has got to take a stand against the corporate greed that is hurting Canadian families. Enough is enough. When are the Liberals going to put in place a windfall profits tax against the corporate greed and put that money back into the pockets of Canadian families that need it?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say to all Canadians, we agree with the member. Enough is enough, Mr. Speaker. That's why we took action, Mr. Speaker. That's why I rolled way back to the Bureau of Competition to ask them, Mr. Speaker, to investigate to make sure there was not any undue practices, Mr. Speaker. And I spoke to the CEOs to say to them, do what's right to help Canadians at the time of need, and we will continue to push them to lower prices for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for North Island, Powell River.
Well, Mr. Speaker, seniors across this country are struggling with the rising cost of living. There is a bar of Canada that we should all expect in Canada, and there are far too many of our parents and grandparents living below it. Yesterday, the government denied my motion to get more financial help to all seniors, regardless of age. All seniors have to pay for food, for rent, and for medication. They deserve dignity. Why does the Seniors Minister not agree?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The NDP knows that older seniors are more likely to outlive their savings. They're more likely to be unable to work, be widowed, and have increased health care needs. This increase helps seniors over 75, of which, Mr. Speaker, 50% have a severe disability, 59% are women, 40% are widows. In this fall, we doubled the GST tax credit for seniors 65 and over, which will put back an extra $225 in their pockets. Mr. Speaker, we will always provide support for seniors. We will continue to deliver for them.
The honourable member for Yukon.
Mr. Speaker, First Nations children thrive when they can stay with their families in their communities and be surrounded by their culture, an area where the Yukon has made significant progress. It has been 3 years since the Act respecting First Nations, Inuit and Métis children, youth and families came into force. Can the Minister of Indigenous Services inform the House how this government, working with First Nations partners, is advancing on this key priority?
Good question.
Well, Minister of Indigenous Services.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member from Yukon for his question and for reminding us that nothing is more important than keeping families and children together. And Mr. Speaker, on Tuesday, I joined Chief Glenn Hudson and Minister Rochelle Squires in Manitoba to sign a historic coordination agreement, Mr. Speaker, that's going to put Peguis in the driver's seat to determine the best way to protect children and families. Mr. Speaker, this means the next generation has a better chance. I'm so proud, Mr. Speaker, to be part of a government that understands that keeping families together is of utmost importance.
The honourable member for Miramichi Grand Lake.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Prime Minister, everything feels broken in Canada, including the bail system. Violent crime has increased 32%, gang-related homicides by 92%, and 5 Canadian police officers were killed in the line of duty this year. Bail for violent repeat offenders has become a revolving door. When is this Liberal government going to take responsibility for their actions and stop this catch-and-release bail justice system?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve to be and to feel safe. We all have a role to play in protecting our communities. Mr. Speaker, the laws on bail are clear. If an accused person poses a serious risk to public safety, they should not get bail. At my direction, Mr. Speaker, from the month of October past, federal officials have been working with their provincial and territorial counterparts to develop ways to best keep Canadians safe. We are open to that discussion, Mr. Speaker. We're open to participating with the provinces to help in the enforcement of bail conditions. Mr. Speaker, we're looking for lasting solutions.
The honourable member for Miramichi Grand Lake.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'll ask that minister to tell the victims of those 5 police officers what he just told me. Most Canadians do not live in homes surrounded by walls and gates and don't have the security detail of the Prime Minister. That is a luxury that Canadians do not have. With a 26% increase in New Brunswick crime over the past 5 years, rural Canadians are also negatively impacted. These failed soft-on-crime Liberal bail policies are making Canadians feel less safe. When will the Prime Minister put victims ahead of criminals?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I take offense to the idea that any of us are less empathetic towards victims, particularly in these very cases. Mr. Speaker, our heart goes out to those victims. Mr. Speaker, with respect to the bail system, I have been working with my officials, with officials across Canada, provincial and territorial counterparts, precisely to see where we can improve the bail regime, Mr. Speaker. We know that Canadians need to feel safe, and we are moving forward in a positive direction, appreciating that it is a complex issue, that it is a shared area of responsibility with the provinces, and with the provinces we will find a solution.
The honourable member for Fundy Royal.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Canadians take offense to a government that will not listen to the pleas from all 13 premiers that have seen violent crime go up by 32% in the last 8 years. Out of 44 shooting homicides in Toronto, Mr. Speaker, last year, half of them were committed by someone who is out on bail. In a single year in Vancouver, 40 people arrested 6,000 times. Wow. After 8 years, this Prime Minister, career criminals have never had a better friend. Does this Justice Minister honestly stand by his claims that our broken bail system is working?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, cherry-picking statistics and taking high-profile cases and using them for political purposes does not help us to attack the challenges that the bail system presents to us. Mr. Speaker, as I've said, we have been working on that question since the month of October with our provincial counterparts. We are looking at solutions that can be fixed in the law, but we're also looking at the kinds of things that the provinces can do in the administration of the bail system. British Columbia has taken a leadership role, Mr. Speaker. I met with the Attorney General for British Columbia yesterday to go over what BC was doing. Ontario is interested, and so are other provinces. We'll work together.
The honourable member for Fundy Royal.
Canadians don't need victim blaming. They need leadership and action. Which stats would the honourable minister wish that we weren't cherry picking? Violent crime is up 32%. Gang-related homicides have increased by 92%. 44 shooting-related homicides in Toronto. Half of the accused were out on bail. 40 offenders arrested 6,000 times. Right. If the minister has some stats he'd like to share, we welcome them. Until then, we need to get our heads out of the sand, take action, listen to the police, listen to communities, listen to the premiers, and reform this liberal, failed bail system.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Indeed, as I said earlier today in the House of Commons, statistics from Toronto Police over the past 2 years show that offences committed while out on bail have gone down over the past 2 years. Mr. Speaker, we appreciate that Canadians need to feel safe, and Canadians have a right to feel safe. Mr. Speaker.
Okay, please continue.
Mr. Speaker, Bill C-75 codified what were essentially Supreme Court decisions and made it harder to get bail in a number of cases and did not change any of the severity of bail conditions for violent criminals. Mr. Speaker, yet we're still going to look at other possibilities with the provinces in order to move forward to make Canadians feel safe.
L'honorable député d'Avignon.
The honourable member for Avignon, Amitis-Matane, Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, in Montreal, 73% more people are receiving welfare today compared to last year, not because of a lack of jobs, but because of Roxham Road. The federal government is inviting asylum seekers to take Roxham Road, and once they're here, it can't issue them a work permit for up to a year. The federal government is ensuring that these people end up in poverty, and they have to turn to welfare, and it's costing Quebecers $20 million more every month. Will the government pick up the check? The federal government? After all, it's the one responsible. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Quebec is a valuable partner for the federal government, and we understand that the province is engaging in very hard work to support asylum seekers. Our government is offering support totaling $134.5 million in support to provinces, as well as a great deal of support to Quebec in order to help the provinces deal with support to asylum seekers. We have also invested to ensure that there is medical coverage for essential medical care for asylum seekers, and we will continue to collaborate with our partners. The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Liberals love to tell us what to do, and yet they are pushing asylum seekers towards welfare. And that's not it. There's also a housing shortage, in great part because of underfunding from the federal government, so dozens of asylum seekers are homeless and are turning towards overloaded community organizations and shelters. There are people who will end up in the street because we're not giving them resources. Where can these people go? Nowhere. Why not suspend the Safe Third Country Agreement, spread out asylum seekers throughout the country, and welcome these people with the dignity they deserve? The Honourable Minister of Heritage. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc Québécois is actually, when it comes to telling people what to do, is the international world champion. Now, had my colleague consulted the documents, he would have seen that between 2017 and 2020, the Government of Canada contributed $374 million for Roxham Road. And for 2021-22, Quebec has sent us the bill, and we're going to sit down and talk about it. We're also paying for health care for asylum seekers. We are there for Quebec. The Bloc Québécois doesn't like it, but we deliver.
Member for Kildonan St. Paul. Honourable.
Mr. Speaker, today the Justice Minister said if someone poses a significant threat to public safety, the law tells us they should not get bail. But in reality, Mr. Speaker, in Toronto last year, of the 44 gun murders, 24 of the suspects were out on bail when they committed these murders. Those 24 people clearly posed a threat to public safety, and yet they were out on bail. So when will this minister get his head out of the clouds and commit to reforming our broken Liberal bail system that he helped create, Mr. Speaker?
That's right. The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's a fundamental principle that if a person poses a threat to public security, they should not get bail. Mr. Speaker, that's balanced. That is balanced with the fact, Mr. Speaker, that bail is not only a charter right, but it is a common law right of long date, because in our system, one is innocent until proven guilty. Mr. Speaker, we allow judges to make that determination based on the arguments that prosecutors and defense attorneys put before them. So I won't revisit an individual case. But what I can say, Mr. Speaker, is that we are working with our provincial counterparts to see how we can improve the bail system in order to make Canadians feel more safe.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Lafiore. Mr. Speaker, violent crime in Canada has increased by 32% since 2015 and gang-related murders by 92%. And the Liberals, supported by the Bloc Québécois, passed C5 legislation to remove minimum sentences. That's what Canada looks like after 8 years of this government. More crime and more criminals in the street. Can the minister acknowledge reality and admit that his policies favor criminals and penalize victims? The Honourable Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, as I just said in English, the bail system is extremely important in our system. If someone poses a threat to public safety, they should not be freed on bail. There is a balance to be struck here, Mr. Speaker. We will work with the provinces because clearly the federal government is responsible for the criminal law, but we need to focus with the provinces' collaboration on how to administer the system. That's what we will do together. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Lafiore. Mr. Speaker, serious crimes should have serious consequences. That was the motto when the Conservatives were in power. But now, there is no more mandatory minimum sentence for rapists. For example, Jonathan Gravel, a man convicted of rape, will serve his sentence from the comfort of his home. A Crown prosecutor in Quebec was brave enough to criticize this unacceptable situation. Has the minister forgotten the word justice in his title? Because there is no justice here for victims. The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we firmly believe that all victims of sexual assault deserve a justice system that treats them with dignity and respect. I would like to recognize the resilience of the victim in question. Mr. Speaker, as I have said several times, serious crimes deserve serious consequences. My colleague knows this, Mr. Speaker, but I can't comment on a particular case, but I can say that it was a decision of the Quebec courts. And the decision to appeal the case remains outstanding. The Honourable Member for Saint-Léonard-Saint-Michel. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Justice just announced a 1-year extension before allowing medical assistance in dying for people with a mental illness as only medical condition. We know that medical assistance in dying is a complex subject and it's very personal for many Canadians. Can the Minister explain to us the reasons for his decision? The Honourable Minister of Justice. I'd like to say grazie to my colleague for Saint-Léonard for her question and leadership. This is a complex issue. That is why we have listened to experts, members of the medical community, and concerned citizens who were asking for more time for clear standards to be developed. Canada has developed legislation on medical assistance in dying in order to support autonomy and freedom of choice while protecting the most vulnerable. We will continue to go in that direction, and we will do things right.
The honourable member for Simcoe North.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of fiscal mismanagement, this Liberal government isn't even hiding it anymore. They've now decided they no longer need to accept the advice of the Auditor General, who says $27 billion of COVID support payments need to be investigated. Instead, the CRA says it's not worth the effort. So will the government take the advice of the independent Auditor General, or do they believe it's not worth the effort to recover money for taxpayers?
Great question.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, when the pandemic hit, we acted quickly to get recovery benefits into people's bank accounts without delay. Right. To achieve that goal, we plan to verify eligibility in the back end after the fact. This approach kept workers attached to their jobs and positioned our economy to come roaring back. The report found that our individual support programs achieved their intended goals of getting money to Canadians quickly, allowing Canadians to stay home safely, avoiding severe social and economic consequences. Sure did. This AG also noted that lower-income workers and groups most impacted by the pandemic were able to benefit from the programs. Mr. Speaker, we are proud of the measures we took to support Canadians.
That's right.
The honourable member for Essex.
Mr. Speaker, the words costly coalition has been given new meaning. Last week, we heard that the head of the CRA said it wouldn't be worth the effort to fully review $15.5 billion in what might be incorrect pandemic wage benefits. Wow. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, Canadians are using food banks more than ever and finding it impossible to buy a home. Mr. Speaker, does this Liberal government think it isn't worth the effort to fully review payments with a total of $32 billion of Canadian tax dollars?
Good question.
Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Speaker. It's unfortunate. It turns out the member opposite was not attending last week's meeting of the Public Accounts Committee, because if he was, he would have heard the Commissioner of the CRA say that verification work is ongoing with respect to CERB, with respect to CEWS, with respect to all of the emergency programs that this government turned out to help Canadians, individuals, families, and businesses. It's a fiscally responsible approach that we promised throughout. In fact, you should go back to the record. In November of 2020, it was that party, the Conservatives, that voted against carrying out CRA audits on businesses. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
Mr. Speaker, Abdul Hamdard is in Ottawa this week and here today pleading with the Liberal government to get his family out of Afghanistan. Abdullah served alongside our troops in Afghanistan and his family qualified to come to Canada almost a year ago, but nothing has happened. His brother is now missing, feared dead, and his family is living under daily threats. He personally met the minister on Tuesday. How many more Afghans that have helped Canada need to die before the minister commits to urgently getting Abdullah's family and other Afghans safely to Canada?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, I have to say, if it was a matter of will, there would be 40,000 Afghan refugees here already. There is obstacles that are beyond certain control. As the member just said, the minister did meet. But let me remind this House about the last number we have. We have here, so far, agree and welcome 26,700 Afghans that can now call Canada home. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to work with our Afghan community. Merci.
The honourable member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Afternoon, Mr. Speaker. Like many employers, last year the federal government experimented with new hybrid approaches to work. Now it has begun phasing in a new common hybrid work model across government. Can the President of the Treasury Board please explain how this model will help the government serve Canadians? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
President of the Treasury Board.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my honourable colleague for not only his question, but his hard work for the people of Vaughan Woodbridge. Mr. Speaker, Canada's public service is one of the best in the world. Hybrid work lets us harness the best of in-person and remote work, creating shared in-person experiences that foster collaboration and trust, together with the flexibility of up to 2 to 3 days of remote work a week. Consistency in how hybrid is applied across government will make employees' experiences consistent no matter what where they work, and it will support our core purpose, serving Canadians. Thank you.
The honourable member for London Fanshawe.
Today I presented a petition from over 33,000 Canadians calling on the Prime Minister to defend public health care. Canadians know that when Conservatives say innovation, they mean privatization, which means lining the pockets of corporations and sticking patients with the bill. And the Prime Minister knows it too. Last election, he called out the Conservatives' support of healthcare privatization, promising he would defend our public system. But today, he will not keep that promise. Will the Prime Minister tell us if he meant what he said during the last election, or if this is another Liberal flip-flop?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me be clear. Canadians are proud of our system, and this government is too. It is based on need and not the ability to pay, and we believe that all you should need in order to get health care, Mr. Speaker, is your health card, not your credit card. We will make sure that our investments respect the Canada Health Act while always defending our universal, public health care system. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Richmond North Athabasca. Mr. Speaker, in my riding, there are organizations that welcome artists, athletes, and international students year after year. And they, of course, need a visa. But the problem is that the processing times are now more than 18 months. That's 14 months more than in July 2022, even though the standard is supposed to be 14 days. In August, the minister said that a high would be reached in September and that after that, processing times would go back to normal. But now we're in February and things are getting worse and worse. How can the minister explain this total failure for people who are trying to get a visa? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration. Mr. Speaker, we are doing everything we can to address this situation in the immigration system in order to make it more sustainable. We processed around 4.8 million requests in total, double what we did the previous year, and we came back to the 60-day service standard for educational permit requests, and so we're allowing more people to come into the country, and we are delivering and hiring more workers. Thank you.
That's all the time we have for question period today. It being 3:10, pursuant to order made on Thursday, June 23rd, 2022,